Joe, go ahead, go into our three pillars. Let's talk about them, what we see when people are using them, and what we see when people aren't.
Yeah, alignment, tension, access. Quick definitions for each. Alignment, how do your bones line up relative to each other? Tension, how are we tensioning our muscles? Well, to tension the muscles properly, we'll give you proper alignment. Combine the two of them, you'll get access. Access is the idea that the joints have an ideal amount of space to move. Where we see it is one, everyone has alignment. If you have bones in your body and you have limbs, you have alignment. Most people's alignment sucks. The reason their alignment sucks is because they're not tensioning right. So we're always tensioning our body, no matter what. When you're sitting in a chair, your front side muscles happen to be tensioning more. When you're doing certain types of training, you're tensioning certain areas. If you're not conscious about how you're tensioning everything, you're not being conscious of how your alignment is. And
Yep.
then the same way that you will create the ideal amount of joint access if you combine tension and alignment, the same is true for the other way. If you're tensioning wrong and as a result your alignment's wrong, you're not going to have the ideal amount of joint access. You're either going to have too much or not near enough. And
Yeah.
so all of those working closely together, if you even just lack one of them, at some point or another, it will lead to a pain or injury.
Yeah. And so these major movement errors that we see when we are lacking alignment, tension, and access are one, foot collapse. Our foot is meant to be a half dome when we're resting and then a spiral landing platform when we're moving. The toes will lock down, the heel will climb, and then your foot, hip, and your ankle, or your foot, hip, and spine will all work together to accept and release force. When we're collapsing to the inside edge of that foot, to the heel of that foot, we're losing space in the ankle. Our shin will get stuck. And then, of course, the ankle and the hip can't work together. The hip and the spine can't work together. And we just lose efficiency and we lose safety. The next movement error would be the tail tucking or a hip thrust pattern. When we do that, and it's all over the training, right? When we do that, we lose space in our lower back, our lower spine, creating compression in that area. And then our hips lose space because our femur heads get shoved into the front of that hip socket. And again, hip, spine can't work together. Hip and ankle can't work together. There's just disorganization throughout the entire body. And then finally, the hip thrust of the upper back would be a rib flare. And we talk about this, let your nipples be the guide, right? If
Right.
you're if you're rib flaring, if you're rib flaring, your nipples will be trying to point up at the sky, putting a lot of compression on that upper to mid back and losing space in that area. And again, we're going to lose efficiency of movement. We're going to lose organization between that spine, hip, and ankle. And I'll let you talk about this, but we see these movement errors in training all over the place. We see the rib flare, we see the hip thrust, the tail tucking, we see the foot collapse. So let's just go into a few exercises that we see, and then we can actually talk about exercises that we see that follow along with the three pillars of movement, of pain-free movement.
Yeah, the big one for foot collapse, we'll start there, is oftentimes you'll see it in deadlifts, certain types of squat patterns, and really any kind of clean movement.
Yeah.
So what's happening then is with a deadlift or a squat, you're going to be flat-footed and you're going to quite literally go towards that big toe and start to try and produce your force that way rather than letting it be the entire front part of the foot, kind of reverting that energy to the outer part. So now we're just slamming it into the ground and we're only functioning from that part of the foot. Well, over time, that's going to translate to, yeah, the field, the court, or just movement in general. I'm going to only want to use that inside part of the foot because that's all I've trained it to do. That's all it's really, when I'm going to train and produce maximal output in anything, I am tensioning my body to operate off of a flat foot off the inside edge on a foot collapse. And so then the other one would be if you're doing a clean, like I'm kind of coming up off the ground, my weight's kind of coming up a little bit, but then I'm accepting that energy on a collapsed foot. And then I produce up on a collapsed foot. So now I'm kind of doing, I got two separate things going on here. That's both I'm landing to the ground in a way on a collapsed foot, and now I'm producing force with a collapsed foot, both of which are opening up the possibility for an array of injuries. You've kind of explained the mechanism a little bit, but there's a lot of data that suggests like the amount of ground reaction force that comes from that heel strike and on that collapsed foot, it puts a tremendous amount of stress on the knee being one of them, especially that's really popular right now with ACLs, but it can be anywhere in the body. It can, that energy can leak anywhere.
Yeah. And I think something that's really good to point out about these movements, such as the Olympic lifts, the certain types of squat patterns where we're direct spinal loading or direct shoulder girdle loading, and the deadlift, is they're all producing backwards force. The whole goal is to pull the weight toward you. And if we think about that, it just doesn't translate to forward movement. And people will say, well, training is general. We're just training to produce force using our muscles. And then when we're practicing our sport, we'll figure it out. And that just doesn't happen. If you just look at the film, the people who are really good at deadlifting, people who are really good at Olympic lifting, people who are really good at the back squat, the front squat, that pattern transfers over to their forward movement. And that's what's putting them at risk. That disorganization pattern between the spine, hip, and ankle will just keep them compressed, keep them moving inefficiently, and keep them moving in the injury pattern. Talking about the hip thrust, right? So the hip thrust is how you produce force backwards. It's thrusting your hips forward to pull back. And if you see a hip thrust on the field, on the court, in life, you're probably falling backwards and you're in a bad spot to actually repetitively produce force. And I don't know why we would train it. And I used to train it a lot, and it doesn't make sense to me now. And it really didn't make sense to me then. It was just the way we did things. So when we start thinking into this stuff, it's just, it doesn't make sense. Let's train for movement. It's what we do 99% of the time. If you want to lift for your sport, if your sport is lifting, that's fine. Train for it, but it's still not going to be your 99%. It's going to be like your 15% rather than everyone else's 1%. And then the rib flare, just by nature, how we load a lot of these movements will produce a rib flare because we're trying to counterbalance that direct girdle loading or that direct spinal loading. And we're going to produce a lot of T-spine flexion or T-spine extension when really that T-spine is supposed to be curved forward toward the front of our body to keep space for us to breathe, keep space in the actual spinal joints, and keep us moving efficiently and without pain. Going into how we have actually started to battle these movement errors, our squat pattern is all based around pairing alike actions. When we're squatting, our spine is not rotating. So we want everything else to be resisting rotation. That's how we're going to find that max tension in order to keep alignment and keep access to our joints. When you see people going down in their squat pattern and their legs open up wide, they're just shortening their glutes. And I mean, it's an effective way of accepting force. I won't deny that. Like, you're going to be able to do it. But what you're doing is turning off your glutes' ability to produce force now. Because if your glutes are completely shortened, you know what they can't do is shorten more to push yourself up. So it's just a very inefficient way to perform the squat pattern.
Yeah. And that's a good, like with the whole you're shortening the glutes. Like everyone, think of your local CrossFitter or even so many, just any CrossFitter that you might have seen in life, incredibly strong in their movements. They can produce a lot of force in the movement that they're striving for, but it is kind of a stereotype in the fitness community and the world in general that CrossFitters have just like no butt. But it's because they're shortened all the time.
Mhm.
Like they've trained their body and their alignment. They have tensioned their body into an alignment that involves the glutes always being shortened. And so if they just didn't shorten their glutes all the time, they might have a butt and then it would match the rest of their, jacked body. But
Yeah. Yeah. If your shoulders are bigger than your butt cheeks, you need to reevaluate your training methods, probably.
and so it's like, and it really all boils down to the simple fact that you are, no matter what, you're tensioning your body one way or another. It's inevitable, whether you're training or not training.
Yeah.
How you tension your body matters if you want proper alignment, proper joint access, and pain-free movement, and just overall optimal efficiency with your performance too. If you tension the body the way that it wants to be tensioned, the way that it's designed to be tensioned, the rest will start to fall into place.
Mm.
If you're not aware of how you're tensioning it in the weight room and you're just tensioning it in ways that aren't natural, you'll start to have problems eventually, one way or another.
Yeah. So before we sign off of this call, I want to remind you guys who have been watching that you can be part of these weekly family table discussions. We're going to drop a link with this video.
Click the link in the description to join the Move Pain Free family. When you join the Move Pain Free family, you'll get a free back pain playbook, a free 3-day back pain relief routine, a reserve spot at all of our family table calls, and access to our 90-day recode program. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more information in the future about how you can live an active life while moving pain-free.